Hello, this is Aassia Haq. I am the Chief Marketing Officer for MBO Partners, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the Third Path, Independent Consulting for Entrepreneurial Women. This is the latest in the MBO Partners webinar series on both current and aspiring consultants and helpful information to help them succeed. I'll give just a minute for a couple more of us to join the webinar. I noticed there's quite a few people registering as I'm speaking. And then we'll move on to just give you a little bit of background information on how the webinar works, as well as dive right into the topic. So I think probably we should start moving now to into the main webinar slides, and hopefully those that are joining a little bit late can catch up. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am the CMO, or Chief Marketing Officer, for MBO Partners. This is a role that I began a little under a year ago. But prior to that, I've had a lot of what I'd say are very fun and informative and educational experiences that I think should lend to a lively topic discussion today. Most recently, before taking on this position for MBO, I was an independent marketing consultant, and so really gained a strong understanding of some of the qualities for success on what we're calling the third path for women and for consultants in general. Prior to that, for many years, I ran a web startup called Alumrise Incorporated, and the premise behind Alumrise was really that there was a tremendous growing invisible workforce of people with skills and experience that had chosen to work on their own terms. I felt it was important, and that those that were around me felt it was important, to try to create solutions and to find a way to connect the skills and talents of those that were outside of traditional workforce roles or were transitioning from a formal workforce role into a variety of new life experiences, and create ways to solve those using technology, using better processes between clients and organizations. And that really has helped me to bring a different perspective and vision to the team at MBO. Prior to that, I spent a decade doing brand marketing, public relations, and communications for divisions of PepsiCo, including Quaker, Frito-Lay, and Pepsi-Cola, both the international and the domestic business. And proudly, I'm a working mom of a 7-year-old girl and a 2-year-old boy, and so I feel that every day is a little bit of a juggling act, but in a very, very positive way. And for me personally, the experience of being somebody who can choose to run my life on my own terms has been very exciting, and has led me to believe that this is a life choice and a lifestyle that others should know about. So I'm excited to share more on this topic today. So let's move on and just talk about a little bit of just the background nitty-gritties of how you can participate in this webinar and how you can get the most out of it. Just so you know, there's a little full screen icon that should pop up on the right top-hand side of your screen if you want to maximize the presentation area. We will be sending the slides afterwards, but it's often nice to be able to just kind of focus in. You know, we all multitask, and I'm just as guilty as the rest of them of doing that, but I forced myself to shut down every other screen on my computer as we were doing this. Raise your hand if you'd like to alert the organizer that you have a question or comment. There's some members of my team that are fielding those. And you can certainly send a question to me as presenter, and I'll be happy to field those at the end. So those are just a little bit of the background details. But really, the reason that we are doing this webinar today as MBO is because we wonder if this is you, or if this is someone that you know. If you're someone that desires to make a career change, perhaps you're seeking better alignment between your work and your overall life, or you feel you have an opportunity to have a greater impact, you know, this idea of being able to truly control your own career destiny, perhaps earn more or earn more fairly for the work that you put out into the market. You might frankly be tired of the politics and the bureaucracy of traditional work, or you might have enjoyed it but just be ready to move on because of a life stage change like a new child, retirement, a change in your dependent environment. Or you simply may just want to do more with your life and have more control over your daily schedule without feeling that work needs to necessarily be cut out of your life path. and you might want to spend quality time with those that you love. These are all themes and ideas that we hear every day from the independent consultants and associates we work with at MBO Partners. And I wonder if this is you. I'm curious. I'd love to hear about that if anyone would like to chat or agree. But what I'd like to do is talk about the paths that a woman can take. The title of this webinar is The Third Path, but I'm going to talk about the first two first. So traditionally, and I'm somebody who's experienced this coming from a relatively traditional family background, where I was held to high standards, and I was made to believe really that there were two choices in life, and they were very black and white. The sort of Rosen v. Romney, if we want to pull kind of the public discourse into it. I can either stay at home and I can be a mother when I reach that life stage, or a good wife, quote unquote, or I can be that career woman, that working woman, the woman that was popularized in the media as somebody who had made a difficult but necessary choice to achieve success, whether you think of Thatcher, the very extreme example, or you think of just the everyday examples in the media. It's sort of this black and white equation. And frankly, I just beg to differ. I believe there's a third path, and there's a third choice. And that choice is to set career up on your own terms and to be an independent worker. And you may be surprised at some of what we as MBO have uncovered as we've gone to understand this population. So what I'd like to reveal to you next on the next slide is some of the data that we uncovered in trying to understand the third path. So the two traditional paths, are well stocked with millions and millions of us, and with no disrespect to those paths. Frankly, I've been in each of them. So I want to be really honest and say, I've been a stay-at-home mom at points in my career. I've been that part of those 64.4 million people that are traditionally employed, full or part-time. And I've enjoyed and appreciated the experiences, and I think anyone who is involved in the career world in any way, shape, or form knows that these are transitions that each of us might experience as women. But I was really shocked by the statistic that I saw when I realized that there are 8.5 million independent women workers in the U.S. today. That's actually more than that stay-at-home mom population. If you think about how much noise and how much media is focused on setting up a dichotomy between those two traditional choices, and really very few resources are given to identifying that there might be a third way. And when you think about the number that are on that path today that are spending a significant amount of their day working in an independent way, and when you also think about some of the data that's within our State of Independence study that shows the future of independent work, really a future in which independent workers of both genders and of all life stages would be a majority in this country, and that's something that we believe will happen before the decade is done, with more than 50% of the private workforce being independent in some way, shape, or form. That's 70 million people. It feels like today is the right time to consider and optimize setting up for the third path, and also understanding who's done well on that path today. And so one of the things that we will share at the close of this webinar and as follow-up is the release of our new infographic, which we're really excited about, that we'll share with you, that shows a little bit more about this story for women, as well as a link to our report for State of Independence for those that have not already seen it. Well, let's move on from kind of the numbers to the really key question, which is, why now? So what on earth has changed that suddenly 8.5 million people are doing something we didn't really expect or understand that they would, 8.5 million women, and multiple more, 16 million independents in total? It's because of a couple of really obvious things when you start to connect the dots. Technology has transformed our lives. We all know that. It's made it easy, and it's certainly made it easier to provide services from where you want to, whether that is in your home, whether that is in an external to a traditional office environment, whether that's from somewhere across the globe. Technology has made it easy. It's also possible now to find somebody based on their skills and experience, something that actually was frankly very difficult to do. It was like searching in a needle for a haystack to understand that there was somebody sitting in a room in Dallas-Fort Worth inside a home office that had marketing and consulting skills. How would anyone have known that before the prevalence of professional social networks, where it was possible to organize people virtually by their background and competencies, find them, pick through that experience, and then determine a way to engage. And all of this really is part of something that at MBO we call the project economy and the rise of the project economy. It's something that's really compelling, even as a video on our website. I encourage you to take a look. And the visual shown here is one part of that video. And really what it shows is that there are less workers inside buildings, those little green dots, and more of those little outlines of people that are kind of jumping out. They're still providing work to corporations and organizations, massive organizations in many cases. Most of the associates that work with MBO as consultants work with major clients that were their former employers, but now they're able to do it on different terms. And that really is sort of a confluence of important forces. The way I like to think about it, tell my daughter this, and I tell my friends this that are considering career changes or career paths, there's always a window of opportunity. And when you see that window personally, and it's different for every person, it's important to take it. And you need to know how to set yourself up to succeed in a new path, but know that there are macro factors, both in the growth of the sector, in its dynamic, the change in the business environment, as well as a change in how clients, meaning companies and corporations, think of individuals. You know, no longer do they necessarily think of them as employees, but rather as resources that might sit inside their doors or might sit quite somewhere else. But at the end of the day, does it matter where they sit, or does it matter more what they know how to do? So that's a little bit of the why now. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of background as to the change in the external dynamics. So let's move on and actually talk about a couple of other interesting things. So this is a little bit of a, sort of a style chart that kind of has that little traditional business matrix. But the reason that I put it up here is because I think oftentimes when somebody's considering a new way to work, and especially if that new way of work is a non-employee dynamic, it's really important to understand how and where you personally can fit. And there's many ways that you can fit into this market. There is, on the lower end of the spectrum, for those that are new to this career path, that might be a little bit nervous, might need a sense of continued community. There might be anonymous and really tactical ways to communicate. You might be a part of a freelancer marketplace where you're really providing work based on price or deliverable. You might go to an agency or a third party and consider working through them because you might not be yet sure of yourself. You might be looking to get a foot in the door. It might be best suited to the skill set that you provide. You may be somebody who's already part of the consulting sector. You're part of a branded large firm where there is an external brand. There's a reputation that you take with you, and you might start to think about migrating to that top right-hand side of the quadrant where essentially you change from being an employee to being a type of business or a type of business person. And so if you think about that top quadrant, it's about your experiences and about the value to provide. And who is your competitor? It's not the person who used to sit next to you in the cubicle. You sort of have to take that hat off and instead say, who wants my experiences? In a recent study that we did in partnership with Aberdeen Group, it was found that the reason companies use consultants is not because of cost cutting. It's because they need access to skills that they don't have inside their doors. 70% of companies surveyed, 77%, I'm sorry, said that they use these consultants because they need these specialized skills. So you might want to kind of note down for yourself on a sticky note or a piece of paper, or if you're like me on my iPhone, so what's mine, right? What is that one thing that's my calling card that everyone comes to me for? And that's how you fit. So that's just a putting yourself into that context might be a helpful first step. Right, well, let's move on from this sort of another bit of a macro or industry perspective and take a little bit of a segue and talk about something that I personally am excited to share that came out of our data. The third path is not a path about not taking the best path. It's about success. we look at the role of women today in corporate America, and actually just was listening this morning to a really inspiring video that was put together by a social organization. I might, in fact, try to post it to our MBO wall so others can see it, about how girls begin their life aspiring to be leaders. As an 8-year-old, you want to be a leader. As a teenager, you still want to be a leader. You want to succeed. But when it gets to real life business, only 4% of women are on boards today in traditional roles. Only 25% of women are in some kind of C-suite. Even in women-owned business, so in traditional business, 30%, we're still not hitting a majority for women. But when you look at the cohort of women independent workers as a part of the total independent work population, it's a majority. It's a small majority. To me, more importantly, it's equality. And to me, that says that from a career standpoint, the third path is indeed a path to success. And I think that's a really exciting and energizing statistic that we were surprised to find and pleased to be able to share with the market as part of our independent workforce index. So let's move on and kind of, in terms of this framing, let's get to the practical stuff, right? So you've heard some of the why now, some of the ways you might fit. But what are the steps to the path? There's sort of a practical question that you may be considering. How do you get there? And I'd like to tell you that I think there really, when it comes down to it, I believe that there's 4 simple steps. Each of them takes time, but in terms of comprehending and understanding, I believe it's about assessing your readiness, and I think that that cannot be underlined more in terms of consulting being for those who are planners and who are able to honestly look at themselves and know their marketable points and also know the areas where they need help. We like to think of it as go solo, but don't go it alone. Know where you need augmentation. Define your challenges, and each of us has challenges. They might be personal, in terms of support, they might be financial, they might be just barriers in terms of how we think about ourselves in the world, or they might be practical challenges in terms of our industry and finding work. And that kind of leads to the third point, which is find advisors and supporters, and a little bit about how we can talk about how to go ahead and do that and some of the things to focus on and to avoid. And then the elements of what we think are the secrets to taking the leap. And they're simple, but they're important to understand in context. So now that you've seen the overview of the 4 steps and hopefully you're interested in learning more, let's go to talk about step 1. So step 1 has a couple of parts, and it's a series of questions. The first question is the most critical, and this is not a gender question. It's not here because this is a webinar for women. We tell everyone that is going down this path to ask themselves this: are you emotionally ready? Dig a little deeper and ask yourself these questions. Do I enjoy working independently? Do I have good time management skills? Do I have a supportive family? Are there people that are nervous about me taking this path, or are they all engaged and excited? Have I really gotten them ready? So are we all emotionally ready, whoever's in this together? Are there people that rely on me? And do I worry about how I manage that in a new career from either a cost or just an emotional standpoint? Is there a high level of stress in my personal life? Am I using this as an escape, or truly because I think this is the strategic next step for me? Have I planned this decision? And am I ready to change, or am I still in the process of what I call warming up emotionally? So these are really important questions to ask, and I'll share with you that at critical junctures in my career, I've given a lot of time to this. When I made a decision to leave corporate America, it was not an easy decision. It was on a path of success. I was part of an organization I had tremendous respect for and still do, and felt the sky was the limit. But for a series of reasons, I felt for my family and for myself personally, with the desire to be an entrepreneur, that the time was right to exit. And there was a process of aligning both, whether it was my parents who were shocked that I had exited the path, or my husband who said, well, what does this mean? And are you going to bother me now that you have more time on your hands? Or the positive, the time I was going to be able to spend with my daughter as I researched each stage of my new business life, whether that was running a startup or becoming an individual consultant or an independent consultant. And there were periods of stress that I had to manage through, but ultimately it was about creating that plan and having the confidence to not have other voices in my head. It's about getting ready to listen to your own voice. And I really encourage you to think about any decision in this way with confidence in yourself and your emotional readiness, but also not a gut reaction, not a panic reaction. So let's move on to the next question in step 1. This is a really big one. Are you professionally ready? And this is a hard question to ask. You have to really look at yourself in a dispassionate way. And you might want to ask others their point of view on this. Do I have a unique marketable skill set? Look, this isn't about whether you got a great personal development review because you're super great at being a cheerleader and helping other people and you build a great team, wonderful skills as an employee. They may not be as relevant as an independent consultant. It's more about, okay, are you a specialist in something that's truly valuable to somebody else? What are you known at being great at? Do you have a vision and path of your professional goals? And do you understand how to run a business? You know, if the answer to that one is no, it's not that you turn and run. It's that you just understand what elements you need. And certainly at MBO, that's one of the core things that we help with. And or we have a consultant services team that's their bread and butter, talking to people that are ready to make this life jump and they just need a little bit of help with some of the details. You've got to wonder, if you were out on your own, who would give you that first project? You know, who's kind of the person that looks to you for help? And think about that and write some names down and figure out, are you well connected enough? You know, have you built out your LinkedIn network? Have you kind of maintained some contact with some key people, whether it's sending an email every now and then? Have you remained on good terms with people that might move from being a boss to being a client, which is a really interesting shift? And definitely prepare and take the time with your online presence. And there's ways that you can look at our blog, and there's multiple ways you can set yourself up to succeed in that way. And it's tough. I honestly, to this day, struggle with this last one, number 8. Am I comfortable with the idea of selling myself? I may surprise you that I'm leading a webinar, but honestly, the idea of going out there and selling myself, I just want to go under a blanket and hide. I don't enjoy that. And I honestly think men or women, there's many people that don't. But there's a way that your experience can sell you, and it doesn't have to be about pounding on doors, but honestly speaking, you have to be comfortable being persuasive and being able to articulate your skills and be confident that somebody would want to purchase them. And a little bit of a thick skin in that regard. So something to honestly assess yourself on. Let's move on to the next question and the final one in step 1, which is very, very critical from a planning and preparation perspective. Are you financially ready? Have you thought through, or have you made plans to build a cash reserve? You know, we think 3 months really conservatively, 6 months is probably a better. A year is wonderful because it gives you enough time to get going. Do you have another person that helps support your lifestyle, or is this about you doing this on your own? So think through that. Do you have a client willing to commit to a contract? And have you fully understood the cost and time commitments, as well as what you need in terms of resources to go out on your own? So all of these financial questions, again, if these are daunting to you, I'd encourage you to reach out to Steve or Sarah or Nicolette on our team, because they honestly have a lot of expertise in this area, as well as feel free to send me a note, because I've had personal experience with this. But this really concludes sort of what I would say are the key questions for step 1, which is the assessing of readiness. So let's move on. I'll give you a little tip of something you can do in terms of a step that you can take before you decide to move on to step 2. So let's move on to the quiz. One of the things that you can do, and this is a really simple step, is that you can take our readiness quiz. It's called Are You Ready to Go Solo? It's available on our website as part of our State of Independence link, and it's just a very simple 10-step question that will lead you to blogs that will help you to answer questions about whether you are red, green, or yellow. So just a little fun step that you might want to take even as we're talking or afterward. So let's move on to step 2 now, which is the next stage, and the very important one, I think, for men and women, which are what are the challenges to address? And I really believe, and this is a tough one, but I think women face specific challenges that might not be faced as much by men, even by your own spouse or your own father or your own brother. It's about what I think of as like a triangle of three things. One is that question of dependent care, and we talked about it earlier in the assessing readiness, but here, these are specific questions. This has to do with earning power. So if you have to figure out how to care for someone in order for you to be able to travel to a client site, to pitch a key client in another city, to even just spend time on the computer working at home if you decide to base yourself at home, it's about the financial equation of what does that cost and what stage of life am I at. If I have young children in the home, you may want to consider truly looking at the cost of the services you're going to provide and making sure that you account for the cost of dependent care or the time taken for dependent care. There's a whole process of arriving at a bill rate that has to do with all the things you didn't know you needed to account for and that you kind of gloss over when you're excited about going solo. We actually have a section on our site called the bill rate calculator where we go into this and some articles that you can download at the end of it. It's really important to know that a certain amount of cost will go into caring for others that you may not have accounted for in your financial equation. So give either in terms of time or dollars. So give that thought and plan for it. And plan for it and how much you're going to charge. The next is a softer one, but it's one that I face with a lot of women friends that I think are incredibly experienced and talented. It's the personal barriers. It's the voice in their head. The feeling that they aren't going to be as successful, that they aren't going to be taken as seriously, they aren't going to be looked at as credible in this path. And these are, let me tell you, they're not people that are inexperienced. They might be senior executives, but they've taken a lot of strength from the traditional talent management structures of large organizations, even if, frankly, they're not enjoying that lifestyle and they're fed up with it. And they really feel trapped and they're looking for a better life. But they feel, well, I'm not sure how to do this on my own. Will anyone take me seriously without this brand behind me? I felt it when I left PepsiCo. I wondered, does that mean I'm now devalued? Nothing could be further from the truth. It's about your confidence in your own skills. And honestly, once you open your mouth and start talking about something that you love, people sit up and take notice, and they care much more about that than what's on your resume. Your resume is merely a ticket to get you in the door. And in this case, you're now a business person. And then in terms of financial planning, I think there's a sense of being daunted by the numbers. Use tools. There's simple tools available on the web that are step-by-step. Our bill rate calculator is just one example, but there's many others to help you work through the back end of what you need to charge in order to really make this a viable life path for you. And do that honestly. If you determine it's not feasible, you have done yourself the best service in not going down a road that was going to be disappointing. If you suddenly realize that you can charge a whole lot more than you realized for your skill set, well, that's the moment to celebrate. So on that kind of nice note, we'll move on to step 3, thinking that maybe you can charge $300 an hour for what you do instead of just taking home $10 an hour. This is a kind of a tough lesson that I learned, and it's a lesson about knowing the difference between who's a supporter and who's just sort of a cheerleader for you. You're not looking for cheerleaders. It's wonderful to have them, and I think sometimes that's what we hope for, you know, somebody on the sidelines cheering us on. But business is a lonely thing. You'll have support and you'll have friends, but it's not about cheerleading. It's about persuasively finding those people that support you because they believe in what you do. So it's about you and your message, and whether that supporter is sitting across from your spouse and saying, I am ready for this, and here are the details, and here are the numbers. Don't panic. This is going to be great for us. Or if that's your former employer and you have to say, look, I'm ready to walk out the door, but I really believe you could be my first client. It's not about expecting them to cheer you on. They're testing you, just like any business is tested. The key lesson here is you move from being an employee to a business person. And think about how businesses get support. They get it one click, one purchase, one review, you know, one product at a time. And that's exactly what will happen to you, is the moment when suddenly there's some people that will pop up that might even surprise you, turning out to be fantastic supporters. And sometimes they might be former colleagues that are out there on their own, and I encourage you to connect with them because they'll probably have words of wisdom. And sometimes it might be somebody you just didn't expect at all. It might be the boss that you thought was going to never speak to you again when you decided to go solo. So let's move on and talk about the final step, which is step 4. And think about how that critical step is the success to taking the leap. And I think there's a key. I've always thought this. I think you have to boil it down to something very, very simple. And I think the key is 2 parts. The key that opens the door to being independent and to taking this third path. One part is expertise. You have to be really good at something that is not as generic as marketing or accounting or business management. That doesn't mean anything to somebody beyond an organizational context. You have to be very good at a specific thing, a specific subset. Let's talk about pricing analysis and brand management. And you need to provide it in a geography and to a certain type of client. Your expertise needs to be specific and be targeted to a certain sector for you to really click as a business opportunity, a business purchase for somebody seeking that skill. Remember, there's 77% of clients that are hiring independent consultants by the drove, and you could be one of them, and paying them very high rates. It's because they want their expertise. And the second thing is, you can't do this just by sitting quietly and talking to yourself. It's about access. So you need to figure out the access, and I'll tell you that the number one dynamic that we see, and this is sort of a lesson if you're on the brink and kind of wanting to rush out the door of a traditional organization, your first project typically comes from your former employer. And so please don't burn bridges as you leave, even if you hate where you work and you really are at a point where you just need to be solo just for calm and sanity and feeling like you've gotten your life back. We've all had those moments. Or maybe you love what you work, but you're now at a door like retirement and you feel like you should sort of gently step away. No, it's about keeping that connection and keeping that access. Put those things together. All it takes is one project. This isn't about building a startup with a perfect product that is going to take you to $5 billion of sales in 10 years. We wish. But this is a different kind of entrepreneurship. It's solopreneurship. And so examples that I'd like you to think about are, women that are part of MBO that we profiled as part of our Meet the Independent series. And again, you'll have this deck so you can click and read their stories. But, Kathy from Texas was actually working inside a major energy firm at the point where it went through bankruptcy. And she had a specific skill set that became very relevant to her industry. And she is on the road 4 days a week, but the rest of the time she's in basketball and softball and football bleachers, I forget which one, working on her computer and cheering on her teenagers. And she's earning great money. She's a super successful woman. She's doing it on her own solo terms. And, she couldn't be happier to share her story. Gabriella from Illinois, her photograph's really fun. I think she has a martini glass in her hand. She's all about choosing the life that she wants. And she's a former Accenture consultant, somebody who had a specific HRO skill set and decided that it was time for her to try to shop those skills independently. Gloria, who's based in Maryland, is somebody who worked for, I believe it was IBM or a large employer like that, and had some really deep corporate experience, real leadership experience, and she took that out into creating a firm. She built a brand name for herself and runs her services through MBO. And Susan, who's from Vermont, is actually somebody who's, I'm sorry, I think this is Jane, actually. That's not Susan. I think I might have gotten the name wrong there. So my apologies there. Jane Applegate from Vermont. So we can correct that. But Jane is somebody who went to independent career after retirement and writes and produces and is a member of sort of the journalism field and took all her skills and went back to work for a couple of different employers and is just loving her new life stage. She's written a book. And so all these women and others, and there are, as you know, millions of others. We told you that statistic at the beginning, 8.5 million women that are solo in some shape or form. What they're doing is they have the ingredients of a skill set, of a certain form of access, and then that magic key of confidence in themselves. And I think when you put all that together and you start to surround yourself by people, and this is really true of the cohort of independents, that no matter what the challenges, no matter what the difficulties, only 1 in 5 ever wants to go back to traditional employment. So it is a little bit like drinking the Kool-Aid, and it is what we thought work should be. And what work didn't end up being for a lot of us in a traditional sense, where we're disillusioned with traditional corporate politics or the change in the hierarchy, or even just that companies are struggling and really trying to find ways to manage their balance sheet. I always try to tell people, think about when a head count goes away. It doesn't mean the need goes away. Somebody's still providing it. It's just not on the G&A line, which is the general and administrative line of the balance sheet. It moves to a different line in the balance sheet, but it still happens. It becomes an expense. So if you're ready to move from being overhead to being somebody who receives the income from being a corporate expense, a really exciting one based on your skill set, I think you're probably ready to take that leap. And so that step 4 kind of, to me, sums it up and gives you the ingredients, hopefully, to get ready. So let's move on, since that's kind of a lot of the meat, and say, what do I think the next steps are, right? Because ultimately, it may also boil down to where you are in your life. And I think there's lots of different life stages for women that might define what their next steps are. So let's take a look at all of them, and then I'll give you my thoughts on each. So let's pull them up. So mom at home, right, or new mom. And I know people in this stage. I've been in this stage. We actually have a marketing consultant who works with us, as a former colleague who's in this stage. And this is all about staying connected, staying relevant, and continuing to build your resume while perhaps making choices to spend more time with somebody you love. Or because financially this might be a necessary decision for you, because you don't want to pay for somebody else to take care of your child, or it isn't just affordable for you. This is a kind of a conundrum that a lot of people face. My advice here is find 1 or 2 key clients that really respect and admire you. Go back and look at your experience and say, who are those people, and work with them. Even if you work with them 5 or 10 hours a week, even if you set up a retainer rather than an hourly relationship, or do a project every once in a while, create your references, add your value, and the minute, and if ever, you want to either go into it full-time or go back in the corporate door, this little segue will not only be personally fulfilling, but also professionally. And I really believe this to be true. I do not think this kind of hiatus is looked down upon anymore. And I can tell you, as somebody who hires, as well as somebody who's been in this role, I believe the landscape is changing for all the reasons that we talked about. So let's move on to the next example. This is a really interesting one because there's a lot of women that are on the verge of leaving traditional roles in corporate America. It might, as I said, be life stage based. It might be because of a risk, because they were laid off. It might be because they want to change paths. They're at a point where there's a sense of urgency or dissatisfaction, and yet there's not as much of an understanding of where to go next. You might be starting a business. You might be wanting to go back to school. Again, what I advise is think of your time as divisible. We're used to throwing all of ourselves, heart and soul, into one thing. I think it's really important to continue to create a source of income, because income is power. And sometimes even taking 20% of your time and doing something meaningful, even if it's pro bono, it doesn't even have to be paid, but it has to be valued. It's something that will continue to give you a sense of relevance, a sense of excitement. The whole encore career, whatever your life stage, is so important and so personally motivating to people that take it on. And they can see the value, and sometimes it opens a new door. When I left my traditional role, a former boss who's now a consultant himself and doing fantastically with North Star Communications, so go Mark, called me up and said, I'd like you to do some writing for me. And I was about to start my business, Alumrise. And my first reaction was to say no, because I was like, well, how can I be a great entrepreneur if I'm working for my former employer? No way. And my husband counseled me and said, you need to just realize that these things take time and that this is a great opportunity to fund your own success. And that's, in fact, exactly what I did. I ended up doing that role for upward of a year, having a fantastic time doing it on my own terms, adding, I felt, great value and building great relationships, but continuing to further my personal goals, being able to pick up my child from preschool, earning a healthy rate per hour, understanding the employment structure, which was important to me as I was creating a startup in that space. So I'm quite an example of both of these two, and I think each of us can probably see some of ourselves in these examples. Let's move on to the next one. This is somebody who, similarly to the example that I shared before, is somebody who's already left. They might have gone, for whatever reason, into a new life stage. They've retired, but they're not ready to go gently into that good night. And they are somebody with tremendous leverageable expertise. When you think about that 77%, I mean, there's probably people beating down the doors of recent retirees saying, how can we get you back in the door? And it's, it's complicated. I will tell you, there's pension issues with working for a former employer, which is usually where the requests come from. And all of those a third party can help with, because there's a compliant, and this is giving you a little bit of a lesson in some of the guts of what MBO does. We help individuals work in a compliant way with others when they're a business of one. Organizations are usually terrified to work with an individual. It just doesn't fit their structure unless there's a system to help them manage that, create insurances, all of the necessary groundwork to give you the key to go solo and build out your own business. It's really, really good to understand that and know that that also can help you in terms of knowing how many hours you need to work to protect your pension. So just something to keep in mind if you're in this live stage. Let's look at the final one. So this is kind of an interesting one because, what we're learning is that a lot of people in Gen Y, they want to go solo even if they've never had experience or worked. And you know what? Sometimes that's a viable step. You might have built a core skill set early on. You might be really savvy about using the web and social networks to promote yourself. We have an agency that we work with that is run by a very dynamic young millennial woman who has not had that many years of traditional experience, but she was able to leverage it and go out and build a solo agency. And what that then boils down to is that you have the confidence to promote and sell yourself, and you're learning on the job. I will say there has to be a core skill. If you're going to go out and just join the creative class, then that's about being more a part of the freelancer group, and that's a very viable way to get your feet wet. But know that it will be harder to access clients and harder to earn that higher value dollar if you're anonymous. What you need to do is become visible to somebody who really will see you as a leverageable resource. So those are the real specific tactical steps that I recommend for each of these examples. If I missed any, please feel free to shoot us a message and we will talk about them. We have just about 15 to 20 minutes left. I want to just go through a couple of things about MBO and then open it up to questions. Because you may be curious about MBO and say, well, what exactly is this organization? What does it do? Well, in a nutshell, we make it easy for independent consultants and their clients to work together. What we do is that when you think about that person that goes out on their own, right, they're now somebody who is a business of one. And running a business is complicated. You really want to spend your billable time or available time doing work and getting paid for it, not managing all the details in the background, and also not being so small that you're not taken seriously. And each of these things, MBO is in your camp. We help you go solo without going it alone. We help you become an independent and reap all the benefits and also become part of our community. We're just launching and pilot a private community for our thousands and thousands of associates that is called MBO Access, and it's really exciting. And so stay tuned for more on that. You can hear about it from Steve and Sarah and Nicolette if you're interested. But really, it's a business platform. It helps with contracts, negotiating and settling those, working on billings, as simple as you have a client and you want somebody to call them and make sure your bill is paid on time. You gain all access to things like the appropriate insurances, including benefits, as well as help with expense management. So for example, I used to find it amazing. I worked as an independent through MBO that I could expense my childcare, the legitimate childcare expenses I had for my little one, and I would receive that tax benefit instantly instead of having to wait until the end of the year. And so it's money back in your pocket off of your business expenses, and they kind of teach you how to manage that. This is one of the things we're great at as a business services team. All of this is sort of a white glove experience. There's platforms and processes and billions of dollars that we've processed for across the Fortune 100 and beyond. We have many, many clients where we have master services arrangements. You kind of plug in. If you find work at that client, we make it easy for you to get through their procurement doors. So ultimately, it's really our job. We feel like we're the leader in the category. We know the category is very significant. We felt it was time for us to educate. We've been around for more than 25 years, but we've kind of been there for that niche group that has understood this opportunity early. As new people start to, MBO is a great resource to help. And so let's move on, and I can talk about a couple ways that you can stay connected to us, to learn more, to gain advice. Of course, you can email us, and you can certainly email me directly as well. I'm ahaq@mbopartners.com, A-H-A-Q, but there's info, and that will direct to me. You can visit our website and look at all the great resources there, follow us on Twitter, and definitely I encourage you to sign up for more information. You can receive updates for webinars as well as sign up for the new independent consulting brief that we're launching. So hopefully all of that creates some great ways to engage. So let's move on and think about whether we have any questions. I'd love to know if there's anything that's on your mind that I didn't address that you hoped that I would, or so this is a question that's just popped up. This is what was your biggest challenge when you were an independent consultant? That's a great question. I think my biggest challenge was that I had limited time to go out and find additional work. So I was really reliant on the network that I already had. So this idea of, pounding the pavements and finding new clients, it just wasn't consistent with my life stage. I was at a stage where I was very, very ambitious, but limited by just simple elements of dependent care and geography. And so I think it's knowing how to find those projects that becomes a big challenge. But the key there is you get one, right? You get started and get your foot in the door. And then I'll add one more. I think it was convincing others around me that this was a valid life choice. I didn't have that data when I made this choice that, there's more of us, and there are even of people that have chosen to opt out of career life, which is a big segment and one that I was already a part of. So just not being able to confidently say that this is a very logical choice and this is a choice that others are making in droves. I think put those together, and those were my two biggest challenges. So let's look to see if there were any other questions. It looks like there's another one coming through. Do you have any tips on communicating your transition to your network? Okay, that is a great question. I think the tips that I have there are that you need to prepare people, and you need to give them you don't want to be apologetic about it. You kind of want to make a very confident choice. I have chosen to move out as an independent consultant because I have XYZ skill set that I think will be valuable to the market. And I'm personally ready to be an entrepreneur. I mean, that at the end of the day, people really respect that. Thinking of yourself as a contractor or as a freelancer is great. I think people get excited when they hear you think about yourself as a business of one, because people love entrepreneurs. They're also a little sometimes envious of entrepreneurs. So one of the things that you might want to deal with is naysayers, that say, oh, how can you deal with the risk? You definitely want to know if you're ready for the risks. But this is sort of the real critical question is, can you with great confidence communicate your readiness and your marketable skill, and put that into both how you talk about yourself online as well as how you deliver your email departure and your verbal departure to your employer when you're ready to communicate that decision. And I would suggest you remain very open to staying engaged. It looks like somebody called Latasha has raised her hand. I don't know if she has a question. I can hear somebody on the phone. Is that somebody who has a question? It sounds like that might not be somebody who has a question. Okay. Latasha, I'm sorry, you might want to type in your question, as I'm not able to see it without kind of seeing it on the screen. In the meanwhile, a couple things that I want to point out to you before we start to wrap up, and also if I get to see those additional questions, is there's a couple places that I suggest you visit to stay connected if you're interested in the topic of women in independent consulting. One is the MBO Partners blog, because that features over time, I think, some really interesting content. Both I tend to contribute and just share ideas, but also we have a lot of different contributors that will focus on different niche topics within consulting. And then our Facebook community is pretty vibrant in terms of topics and content related to women, and of course much more broadly related to consulting. But if this is your specific interest, these are, I think, two great ways to stay engaged. So if we don't have any other questions, I think what I will suggest is that we wrap up. I would encourage you again, if there was a question that for some reason did not get answered, that you please feel free to connect with me. Oh, it looks like it's come through. Okay, thank you, Latasha Poindexter. You asked the question, how do you inform current employers of transitioning without burning the bridge and perhaps having them be your first employer? That is an excellent, excellent question. I started to allude to it in my earlier responses, but I'll be even more specific. I think what you need to do is be very clear about your objectives for transition. There should be no sense that this is because you dislike somebody at your current employer or what you do. It's more about you making a business appropriate decision based on what you feel your skill could command in the open market and how you feel you can help. You should also be very honest. One of the things that I found that at least I had a very hard time with is just being very direct and saying, I would love to work with you as a first client. Are you interested? What can I do to make it easier for you to engage with me in this new way? Look, it's complicated. A hiring manager, they follow the path of least resistance. And sometimes they're told by HR or they're told by their procurement organization that, you know what, this doesn't work. It's not usually true. It's more about you being intelligent and giving them the path to working with you. And that way you come across as somebody who's doing the hard work for them. You're taking the risk, right? And they're ultimately, if they're excited by your skill sets, reaping the reward. You need to show them how your price point is favorable. You need to show them that you can be a great asset to them and that perhaps you might have other opportunities that they might want to even shut you out of, to be honest. You know, they might want to hold on to you so nobody else gets you. And there's a subtle way to make that something that's very attractive. You know, so before I go out into the open market, I really would like to see if this is something that we can work through together. And hopefully in doing that, and if there's no finger pointing in terms of anything that might have led to your exit, a disappointment, you know, a promise not made, it's the time to move beyond it and look to the future. And I think that you might find that one day your manager follows you, who knows, or passes you along to a lot of other friends and says, this is a great resource. I may not be ready to work with you today, but I will be in 6 months. And so they've helped to fill your pipeline. So hopefully that was a good answer, Latasha, and if not, please feel free to send me some additional questions. I know some of the others came across anonymously, so I don't know who the speakers were there. Well, thank you again. I appreciate you taking the time. Just so you're aware, we are launching a media alert on May 2nd to share the new data around women in independent consulting. You'll get a sneak preview before that goes out. We'll send something to you either the 30th or May 1st, as well as a link to this deck so that you can hot link to all the resources that are included. And please do feel free to share feedback because we really appreciate it. We'd like to know what other topics you'd want to see in the series. And I know on behalf of Jean Zeno, who's our CEO, and Steve Aronset, our Director of Consulting Services, and his team, and our entire marketing team, including our marketing specialist, Jamie Buckley, who helps us with these webinars, that we all appreciate your participation. So thank you so much.